From the time of our arrival in Aotearoa, Māori have created a unique architectural history. Our structures not only house people, but also our dreams, our fundamental needs, and our histories. So what can we tell about ourselves from these buildings? What do they say to us? It's a question I've asked myself constantly. I'm Ro Hoskins, and as a director of an architectural practice, understanding the stories held within the walls of our buildings has been a lifelong obsession. In this series, we're going to take you on a journey to explore not just our architectural structures, but also the social and cultural histories from which our buildings arise. We'll ask, what is Māori architecture? And celebrate some of our most stunning buildings.
Kamate, our most famous haka, the cry to battle for the All Blacks known around the globe.
What isn't so well known is that the haka belongs to one of our country's most famous warriors. For several decades of the 18th century, he inspired both awe and dread through much of the country.
His name was Te Rauparaha.
Te Rauparaha brought Ngāti Toa to the Kapiti coast, building a successful trading base here. In the 1820s and 30s, he was involved in a series of devastatingly bloody raids to the South Island, with the loss of many lives. As Te Rauparaha grew older, he looked to other means to increase his mana. He befriended Octavius Hadfield and assisted him with the construction of an early church in Waikarai, and as a result, he was determined to build something finer at his pa in Otaki.
It is said the great warrior plunged his sword into the ground and cried, "Haramai, tangohi ake te taonga nei. Ko mutu taku riri te whenua, ka riri ahau I te rangi. Hanga he tuahu mā tātou."
Come take up this weapon. I no longer seek honour on earth, but seek honour in heaven. We shall build an altar.
His people took up the challenge, and rangiatea was the result.
The rich history behind this church, including devastating tragedies along with impressive triumphs, makes this already grand building even more significant. Originally completed in 1851, this huge wooden church is of a scale unprecedented in Māori architecture at the time. With its Gothic Revival exterior, traditional wharenui construction, and adorned interior, it's an architectural amalgamation of two cultures. A single tōtara tree forms the main tāhuhu or ridgepole, supported by three 12-metre high pillars or potoko manawa, said to represent the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Constructed without modern tools and looking at the sheer scale of this place, there's one question you can't avoid. How on earth did they build it? Using traditional Māori methods of construction like tree tripods and techniques appropriated from the European settlers, it's estimated that over 1,000 men were employed in its tumultuous 8-year construction.
The height of these potoko manawa, you know, way bigger than any wharenui they would have been built at the time.
I can only imagine just the undertaking that it was to get them here and the resources that it took to get it going. I mean, the one story I'd heard of how they got the tāhuhu, which was one piece on top of these posts once they were in place, built up the level of the ground around these po, and then put the tripods to be able to get that height, to get it up on that high.
Wow.
And the skills would have come from far and wide. The mana of Te Rauparaha would have caused that to happen.
Like many Māori churches, it was not only a place of worship, but a place of identity and pride for local iwi. The centennial celebrations drew thousands of people from all over the country. But by the early 1990s, the church was in desperate need of restoration. Dean of Historic Places Trust and Mark of Ngāti Raukawa were part of a team of workers who spent 15 months restoring the church to its original glory.
So what brought about that 1991 restoration?
Water was affecting a lot of the fibre material. Also, some decay was starting to set in as well.
And the original raupō was still in the walls?
Yeah, that was the amazing thing, is that even though the building had probably gone through 3 phases of restoration over the last 100 years, there was still much of the church was original. On this slide you can see, wasn't there a rat?
Possum.
Possum, wasn't it? It was coming to church.
Very pious possum.
Yeah.
So the kōwhaiwhai process was pretty painstaking?
Yeah, no, when we came in with our team of young guys, kitted out with a whole lot of new backpack vacuums. So we all jumped up there and we just started going for it, and flaky paint was flying everywhere. But poor old Dean looked a bit panicky. He said, "Stop, guys, stop now. Do not flick the flaky paint off. We're going to keep that." And we sort of looked at him and went, "You're kidding us." But no, restoration, we were learning as we were going, was to retain as much as was there of the original.
The tuahu here?
To the tuahu here, yep, the altar rail. Dean kitted us out with surgical scalpels and little brushes. Sometimes some of us had to use magnifying glasses, and trying to do it without touching the wood.
I think that's one of the amazing things of this church, that prestige and that goes with mango pare. It speaks a lot about the mana rangatira of that period. So it's a very powerful house in the way that it uses design in its creation.
Tragically, before the church was fully restored, disaster struck. A massive fire consumed the church that had stood for 148 years. It was the largest tangi in Ōtaki since the death of Te Rauparaha himself. Bishop Muru Walters conducted an emotional service in both English and Māori to more than 2,000 mourners. The assembled iwi vowed that Rangiatea would rise again, and a decision was made to build a replica. All of the design work and construction was completed by descendants of the 3 iwi of Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Toa and Te Atiawa.
There's a lot of really unusual idiosyncrasies in this building, things that don't quite line up or they don't quite meet. And we realised very early in the piece that it wasn't our problem, it was how the church was built, so we followed them. I mean, we were meticulous in terms of following what we thought we could do.
They wanted exactly what were before. One said, the second pew, I scratched my name on it.
There was a whole lot of things that we were sort of trying to get an understanding of the church as we were working our way through it. Nothing's random. It's actually, there's a whole lot of rhythm in this building. There's a strong overriding philosophy as to how things are done, and we just followed it. It's not sort of restored. It's brand new. Everything's new. But one of the nicest things that I think was said to us on the opening was, "It feels like it felt before."
It's so important to get it right for them. I think they're happy with it, I think.
True to their word, in 2003, the reconstruction of Rangiatea was complete, and a new church rose from the ashes of the old.
Ka tohia koe ki te ripa ka te kaleitu. Takahia te ara I roto I te whakapona.
It's great. It's amazing. You can't go past the original, and our loss at that time was deep. But to be able to come back and to replicate as close to what was here is an awesome project in itself.
Rangiatea is a showcase of Māori structure and imagery within a Pākehā Christian form. Te Rauparaha had given his people one of the country's finest Whare Karakia. Inspired by Rangiatea, other great Whare Karakia would follow.
Tokotoru Tapu Church in the small settlement of Manutuke on the east coast has a reputation as being one of the finest carved churches in the country. It's a reputation well earned. This is the fourth church of the Rongoa Whakaata iwi to stand at Manutuke, and much of what we see is reminiscent of the first carved church that was built here in the 19th century. It was a magnificent building, one that could hold over 1,000 people. And the story behind its construction is pretty unique. Back in 1849, the famous tohunga whakairo Raharuhi Rukupo, who had carved Rongoa Whakaata's prized wharenui Te Hauki Tūranga, had heard about the impressive rangiatea being built in Otaki, and he wanted to build something to rival it. Rukupo was determined that his great plan of 60 carved popo would distinguish Manutuke from rangiatea. But there was a problem. Archdeacon William Williams, who was the resident Anglican missionary, took exception to Rukupo's carvings because he thought they were evidence of ancestor worship and insisted they abandon the depiction of the full frontal tiki form.
In the end, they had a compromise, and his carvers came up with this idea of the Manaia form because it took away the figures and more so the phallic symbols there. Williams was able to agree to that, and they were able to restart again and incorporated the Manaia pattern. And the interesting part about that, they were very subtle in the way they've done that. In the Manaia patterns, they were able to incorporate the male, the female, the phallic issues that the Anglican Church was so opposed against, but in a more subtle fashion.
Rukupo found a way to straddle the line between the demands of Christian and traditional Māori beliefs. He developed a new style, a carving style that was less representational and more abstract than the whakairo rākau that had gone before.
The Manaia has many kōrero. One main kōrero is Manaia represents the mana. It represents the spirituality of one's person, oneself. So Rukupoa and William Williams had obviously come to a point of mediation and thought about where they could draw a line and still put a lot of these whakairo designs within this chapter.
Rukupo still had the last laugh at the end of the day in putting in the Manaia, which is still a spiritual figure as well.
But little did William Williams know that the tiki ancestors were still present in the panels, only represented from a different angle. Rukupo's non-representational carving style was actually completely representational. He was just carving his tupuna in profile. Archdeacon William Williams was well pleased, and he wrote, "The character of native carving remains, but there's nothing to be objected to." Williams could see the incredible beauty of what had been achieved, but I got the feeling he didn't quite get what Rukupo had really done.
It would be good for us in Tūranga to see some of our own style incorporated here, that being the Tūranga style, some of the original forms. The Manaia form has a different meaning in each area, but for us it represents the spiritual strength of our rangatira, those that walk before us here in Tūranga Nui Ākiwa. I think that's what Rukupo would love to see if he was still around.
In the early influx of Pākehā to Aotearoa, settlers arrived in a number of key ports. The vast majority headed for Te Tai Tokero, flooding into the area to take advantage of what Northland had to offer.
Visiting places like Rangiatea and Manutuke, I realised that the churches I grew up around here in Northland were very different to those vast ornate monuments. Our churches were like our wharehui, modest and uncarved.
But they still hold immense power for the communities they served, and still serve to this day. These Gothic revival churches, built during the colonial missionary movements through Northland, are now revered by architects and artists from far and wide. Lawrence Eberhardt's images of Northland churches are sombre. The photos echo with the humble dignity of these uncarved houses. The Church of Our Lady of the Assumption in the Hokianga is a beautifully restored example of these unadorned churches, and its history is not forgotten by the descendants of those who built it.
My tupuna, Nui Hare, became a stalwart of the church. He, however, had a bit of a checkered history. He married his sister-in-law, our great-grandmother, Ehetere, and that was frowned upon by the church. But quite a faithful man, and he would pray throughout a church service. He would never come through the door, but he would always be there.
After 7 years of excommunication, Father Beckhardt invited him back into the church. Nui Hare was overcome with the desire to build the community a new church.
He rallied the people. He sent the young men out to the gum fields to dig gum to raise money. All the timbers for this church were extracted from our whenua upriver at Tapuai.
In 1910, the Church of Our Lady of the Assumption was completed. The beautiful construction by Nui Hare and the Mill Hill missionaries brought Catholicism to the forefront of the surrounding district.
The siting of this church in a prominent place on the harbour. In those days, the harbour was the main road, and so this was an important statement, I think, for Catholicism in this area. And the many of us that descend from him, he'd have 3,000 or 4,000 descendants now. He's a beacon in our history.
A bit of a triumph for Nui Hare.
Yeah, it was a big feat when you think back to those times and the resources that they had. I mean, just even lifting these trusses up, imagine how they did that.
The design, it's neo-Gothic, I suppose?
Yes, you'll notice there's no Māori iconography, no carving, but I think that was a symptom of the fact that carving was on the wane well before that time, and the church not being keen on that sort of thing.
So it's holding a few older stories.
Yes, and stories like, you look at the altar cloth, kei konei te araki. When we were kids, we thought, God's here, we've got to be quiet.
A beautifully built church too. You can see the care that's gone in. There's a quality craftsmanship involved. Yes, builders that have worked on the place have commented about the quality of the workmanship and the soundness of a good part of the structure even now. Makes it easier when you're doing a restoration, which is kind of superficial as opposed to major structural works and stuff. Yes, it doesn't feel superficial at the time about it. Every generation has had a good a go at a project on this church to keep it up to how it is today. I think it's really significant in terms of identity for Ngai Tūpoto Hapu. It's built on the marae site. Plus, I guess it's, it's timbers from your own land. Yes, I think that's one of the joys to know that it came from our whenua.
On the shores of Lake Rotorua, the village of Ohinemutu, home of the Papa Iouru Marae. Ohinemutu is the site of Tamata Kapua, the premier wharenui of Te Arawa. And facing the ancestral house, under the watchful gaze of the tupuna of this iwi, Te Hahi o Te Whakapono, the Church of the Faith. The mock Elizabethan structure was designed by architect La Trobe Hill, following the Tudor style of Rotorua's famous bathhouse. Today this building is one of our most celebrated Whare Karakia, now most famously known as St. Faith's. The first chapel on this site was the Raupo structure built in 1835. In 1885, a simple church built of heart kauri replaced the original Raupo chapel. In 1914, a much larger church was built. While its exterior is exclusively Tudor, the building was extensively ornamented inside with whakairo and other traditional Māori art. In 1965, the church was extended to accommodate a growing congregation. But in the centuries before the building of St. Faith's, this place had a very different past. The land on which St. Faith's stands was once the site not of prayer and worship, but of warfare. In its prized location on the shores of Rotorua, Ohinemutu was subject to many attempted invasions, and a heavily palisaded pa was built. Over the centuries, many battles were waged and much blood was spilt. In the 19th century, Ngāti Whakaue decided this former battleground should become the site of a church. But first, the legacy of the area's violent past had to be dealt with.
I think I should tell you a little story about the cleansing of this land. Muruika, there was a tohunga that was buried in the eruption, Tarawera, for over a week. How he lived, no one knows, but he lived because he's one of those super people with spiritual strength. Ngāti Whakaue decided that they need the strongest tohunga that we had to cleanse this land. He did his incantations and got 2 sticks and started rolling the evil spirits into the things that were growing along the side of the lake. It was mainly raupo. But they say the next morning, when they got up, all the vegetation was dead.
With the ground cleansed and sanctified, St. Faith's could be built. Today, the visitors who enter this church find a building with a unique blend of architectural influences. While the exterior design of St. Faith's is very true to the Elizabethan or Tudor style that was popular in Rotorua at the time, on the inside, every opportunity has been taken to make sure that this looks and feels like a very Māori environment. From the whakairo here on these pou, the stained glass windows, the tuku panels here, some kōwhaiwhai work in the upper frieze here, and quite interestingly, some tāniko work included in this pulpit here, and it's actually quite rare to see tāniko in an architectural setting. And the extent of decoration in the Whare Karakia here is taken right through to these carved pews, which is again quite a unique feature of St. Faith's. A key feature of the 1967 alterations are these wings with the Chapel of Galilee added here. And the most famous element, of course, is the Māori Jesus walking on water. But the whole thing sits within a very wharenui-like space, and we've got popo here through to tuku, and right up we have heke and the tāhuru through the middle. One name more than any other is responsible for the beautiful and distinctive decoration of the church. Frederick Augustus Bennett was ordained the first Bishop of Aotearoa in 1928. While Vicar of St. Faith's, he built the second church, and it was at his insistence that the interior was decorated with Māori arts. Bishop Bennett's travelling communion kit is still a treasured taonga of the church. The bishop was so closely associated with St. Faith's that after his death, he was given the rare honour of being buried within the church sanctuary. But for Bishop Bennett, the decision to include Māori symbolism alongside Christian iconography met with huge resistance from the leadership of the Anglican Church.
The hierarchy said, well, look, Māoris are heathens. Those are all evil, represent evil things. That wouldn't be the right thing to do. So Bishop Bennett decided that it was the right thing to do, as far as he was concerned. And so he would not bend. And when they built that church, you see what's in there now. There's carvings, there's tuku work, kōwhai work, it's all there. That pulpit you see in there, that black pulpit, when you look at the bottom, you see it's held up by 5 demigods. They hold that building up. And what that represents now is they're holding up their change from worshipping Māori demigods to the conversion to Christianity.
Amongst the magnificent artwork of St. Faith's, Māori iconography is integrated seamlessly with Christian religious symbolism. In this remarkable church, Jesus himself is Māori, wearing a korowai adorned with kiwi feathers.
St Faith's is a place where Māori religious systems sit hand in hand with Christian ones. So this church represents a fusion of Māori and Christian architecture in a way that few other structures do.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.